Hi, thanks so much for coming. And hilariously, there was a lot of last minute shuffling, and it somehow worked out as if it was all carefully curated. So I feel really good about that. I guess that's the art of improvisation, right?
Exactly.
And I was looking at the program and I said, oh, we've got this really interesting afternoon starting with Samantha that is all about digital technology, which was not done on purpose. Like, I didn't put you guys after her on purpose, which is bizarre since a lot of you have worked for her. Um, it just turned out that way. That was the only time she could do it. And it just happened to be right in front of your session.
Hey,
So yeah, but thanks for
synchronicity.
coming. Thanks for coming. Yeah, so we'll do, we'll have you, so all of you guys are presenting, and then we'll have however much time. I mean, it's really up to you how much time you want to have after. I think you guys only have a half an hour, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check.
It was originally a half hour, but I think we are now a full
Oh,
hour.
oh,
You are a
oh,
full hour. Just to clarify, this is a full hour.
oh, I see.
experience.
Yep. It's a full hour. Yeah, I'm glad. That's what I was hoping. I was like, wait, because we've moved some things around. So that's great. I think we've actually did that on purpose to give you more time. Fantastic. Were any of you guys in any of Samantha's stuff that she showed? Oh, that was you. Come on.
No. I'm just saying yes because I was in the session, but not in her slides.
Oh, that's what I meant. Were any of you in her slides or videos?
No.
I didn't catch it. No.
Oh,
we are enthusiasts of her work, and so we've all
Yes.
attended her performances.
okay.
Yes. In fact, I am the canonical mayor of the Underpresents, technically.
Oh, nice. Okay, it is now 2:30, so or 11:30. I'm on the East Coast, so I will introduce you. And as I said at the beginning or in the break, that it's very, very nice how we have this little bouquet of sessions around various kind of digital forms of expression. The one following this is about creating software that specifically helps actors to improvise. So it's like a back-end system that basically is an interface between the audience and the actors. So it's very different from what you guys are doing, which is talking about the interface between the actors on the performance tools. But part of the reason I invited Braden to come with, I basically just said, with Braden, I always go, just bring whoever you want, because I figure everybody that you always show up with is interesting. So that was kind of my MO. But Braden worked on a project that I guess I play tested it, right? Was I a play tester on? It was right around the time you guys submitted it to Indicate, I think, right?
Yep. You were early on.
Severance Theory.
Yep.
An amazing piece of work, which I just want to give 1 minute to fan over because it was so great. And one of the things I loved about this piece was I was in the role of a child, and I was physically smaller than all the actors. And this was a really powerful feeling. And the way that the actors parented me in a very loving way made me feel very safe. But I really felt myself going into that sense of a child. And it was, in this case, a child who had been through something and was coming home, and really very evocative. And I loved that you changed the player's size. I thought that was so subtle and yet so incredibly effective. So, I'm always kind of, I'm going to give a talk a later. Like, I did VR in the 90s, so I'm very jaded. By did, I mean made. I'm very jaded. And as the co-founder of Indicate, I'm always like, show me something I haven't seen before. And that was very much a show me I haven't seen something before moment. So, I'll let you guys introduce yourself, and we're going to be talking about what it's like to act for VR. Yay.
Awesome. One quick note before going into that. One effect that we like to play with a lot in VR is something called the Proteus effect, which is relevant across the entire medium, but it's essentially if you put a player or an audience member, however you want to refer to them as, into an avatar which is not the same as their physical identity in real life, they have a tendency to inadvertently change the way that they act, the way that they speak, and the way that they view the world and experience around them intuitively. And scale play, like shrinking someone down to the size of a 7-year-old, is a very effective way of doing that. I highly recommend being shrunk down to be a 7-year-old. Anyways,
a quick trivia question. Is that related to Nikki's work?
I don't know offhand.
He
I
wrote a book
see.
called The Proteus Effect. So
Probably then. Yeah, I see Evan is saying that yes, it is indeed. Thank you, Evan.
fantastic.
All right. So let me go ahead and share my screen. One moment. All right. So I am Braden Roy, and I am here joined today by Brendan A. Bradley and Clemence Debaig. And we're going to be talking about performing in VR and a few different aspects of it. Now, I will be going over a few of the basics, just kind of laying the groundwork, and then we'll be handing it off to the other two to go in a little bit more in depth in terms of application. But to start us off, I thought I would use this nice illustration, which I've always thought was kind of evocative, which is actually from a book, the very first book, arguably, about virtual reality back in 1935 by a guy named Stanley G. Weinbaum, called Pygmalion Spectacles. Now, you'll see that the quote there is very prescient in that it's the whole story is, in fact, it's kind of wild. It talks about effects like phantom touch, which we didn't really know about until like the last few years. But like, suppose I make it so that you are in the story. You speak to the shadows and the shadows reply. And instead of being on the screen, the story is all about you and you are in it. And that is something that is very important to us in our work, generally speaking, and most of you that aren't working in VR as well. But anyways, I like the image and thought I would throw that in there. But anyways, as I said, I am Braden Roy. I am the co-founder of Ferryman Collective, a immersive VR company dedicated specifically to creating live narrative pieces in VR. I do a little bit of everything. I'm a writer, director, performer. Sometimes I do illustrations, sometimes I do marketing, sometimes I do sound design. All of us within our tight little niche, and I imagine basically everyone that's watching this as well within their own niche, wear many, many, many hats. But we started a little over 2 years ago, and in that time, Ferryman Collective has created about 13 different things that we've either created wholesale or collaborated on. As an example, let's see here, peer-to-peer and space holder. If you see there on the slides, those were both done in conjunction with Onboard XR, which is Brendan A. Bradley's baby. And they've done decent. People seem to like them. So I will take that as a sign that we're going in the step in the right direction. All of us collectively, not just Ferryman Collective, but the entire group. Now, performance in VR can be difficult when coming from a more traditional background, whether it's film, stage, or IRL, immersive theater, playable theater. And you need to kind of relearn how to use the tools at your disposal in order to accurately interact with the audience and properly convey the emotions that you want to convey. And you need to lean on a few core tenets that you might not normally need to in those situations outside of VR. One, voice acting. Due to the fact that a lot of the tools that you normally have at your disposal as an actor, your fine facial expressions and micro expressions and subtle body movements don't necessarily come across unless you have certain equipment, which we'll speak on a little bit later. So leaning on the voice and kind of making sure that you do the whole like smile when you talk thing to really make emotions come across and really I don't know, fill in the gaps that would otherwise be there by an IRL performance. And also it allows you to switch between avatars and characters in a way that a lot of times, at least in many of the shows that Ferryman Collective has done, we have single actors who are jumping through multiple roles in a single show. And at the end, we'll find that the audience member didn't realize that we didn't have like 8 actors or whatever, and it was just 2 or 3 or what have you, depending on the individual show. So voice acting is very important part of this type of performance. And second to that is puppetry. You see, when you step into the shoes, metaphorically, of an avatar, you essentially need to relearn how to operate your own body, depending on the avatar and depending on what you're doing. Sometimes it can be as quote unquote easy as figuring out where your fingers are in relation to your avatar's finger and how far away your face is from your face and stuff like that, like trying to cover up your eyes, and it turns out in VR your eyes are actually up here, so on and so forth. So learning how to embody this new body is an important part of the puzzle. And this more dramatic movements of traditional puppetry also comes across through that, because, as I said before, some of the more fine nuance in body motion sometimes does not translate entirely, depending on what equipment you have. So relying on that and some of the work that people might be familiar with in traditional mime. You need to embody the space in a way where you're interacting with things that might not actually be interactable. They might be things that you could put your hand straight through. You need to be mindful of that, to not walk through a table, to not, I don't know, find yourself in a box and you're not pretending as if you are in a box. Now, it goes further than that, and we borrow a lot from other techniques, going back to things like no theater in Japan and the different levels of mask work that they do. Under normal circumstances with your entry-level hardware, you have no eye tracking, you have no facial tracking. And even if you have the higher end equipment, which does offer that, it's still kind of not the best all the time, not super reliable. You'll end up with your mouth all deforming in ways that you don't intend. So we rely on some of the techniques found therein, where, for example, if you see in the upper right corner of that slide, a single mask, static mask, can be used to show a variety of different expressions that emote very well and can be leaned into with the full body performance that you're presenting, so long as you learn how to basically control your face from scratch without actually using your face. Now, each of these will depend on your setup specifically. Some people will be coming in entry level, some people will come in with more advanced setups, and depending on what you're using, what platform you're using, the tools that are at your disposal can be vastly different. As an example, most of the work that I do is within a social VR app called VR Chat, which has certain limitations and certain functionalities, which has benefits and drawbacks. Or some work is done in Mozilla Hubs. A lot of Braden and Clemence's work is done there, and they've shaped that beast to their will like none other, and have pulled some amazing stuff off, which you'll see shortly. Or there's more bespoke apps, ones that are fully self-contained and built from the ground up for the purpose that they were created, like Samantha Gorman's The Under Presents, of course. Each of these has benefits, each of these have drawbacks, but each of these you need to learn the tools at your disposal in order to get the best performance out of them. Now, at its most basic, the average performer in VR will have at their disposal a headset and 2 controllers. And this is called 3-point tracking because it's tracking 3 points. And using something called inverse kinematics, which is essentially using those 3 points to extrapolate where the rest of your body might be in relation to those 3 points. learning how to puppet that specifically can be quite difficult. Most of these different applications, whether they're existing social VR platforms, WebXR or bespoke, will have mirrors in them specifically for going over how to move these 3 points and make it look as though you're intentionally moving your body in certain ways. But there are more advanced setups as well. There's 6 point, where you could add an additional 3 trackers. Usually it's something like a HTC Vive tracker, which are quite expensive. So there's also a variety of alternatives, some custom, some not, that Mons will be talking about more shortly. So I won't dive too deeply in that and steal her thunder. But those solutions are thankfully becoming more accessible, with Sony even recently, just a few days ago, releasing something, a system for doing multi-point tracking for, I believe, $300. And then, of course, you can step up and you can get up to 11 with many of the more traditional tracking methods, though you're no means limited by that. And doing things like with the Microsoft Connect, if you don't even have trackers, there's all sorts of ways that you can do this. Now, before I hand it off, there is one other aspect which I wanted to touch on a little bit here. Every production is going to be a little bit different. Every one will have different setups and different crew assisting the cast. Though typically, in my experience, across all of the different productions I've worked with or participated in, we try to limit the cast and crew to as few people as possible. And as such, each of our performers, while trying to juggle all of these different things, the mask work, the puppetry, figuring out where their body is in relation to the world, and also giving a hopefully compelling performance that seems as though they're giving their full undivided attention to the audience, they're typically also doing full stage management by themselves, where they have a completely different view of the world that they're in, of the experience that they're in, than the audience do, where they're going through the motions of, let's say, making macaroni and cheese with a 7-year-old child, but they're also, while being mindful of this quote unquote child, hitting invisible buttons and toggles in order to activate the different things that need to happen in the world, while also not breaking their stride. That is a skill which is a discussion in and of itself, because every single experience is vastly different in how it handles that. So I won't dig too deeply on that. If we have time at the end for a Q&A, if you guys have questions on that, we can go a little deeper. But until then, I will hand it over to Clemence.
Thank you very much, Braden. So I'm going to share my screen as well. Let me do that. Just slideshow. Just want to make sure I can still see people. There we go. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Clemence Debaig. I am the Artistic Director of Unwired Zen Theatre, and I've had the chance to work with Braden and Brendan through Onboard XR. And I know that Brendan will explain everything about Onboard XR, so I won't go too much into that. I'm a weird mix between a choreographer, a creative technologist, and also UX and XR designer, and I'm also an educator. I want to explain a little bit what that means on a daily basis. So I am kind of fully dedicated to Unwired and Theatre. I work at Goldsmiths University in London as a lecturer in motion capture and digital embodiment and immersive theatre. And I'm also a researcher involving a project that explores how motion capture and live motion capture can enable performers in different locations to collaborate. And we started pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, and then it became so relevant. And then we uncovered a lot of different things there that is now really part of my practice. And I also work for other projects as a creative technologist and offer my services to other artists. What I tend to do with all those kind of different hats is I bring my dance movement kind of embodied practice that I mix with thinking about extended realities, user experience, HCI, and other interaction design considerations to then look at what technology can enable what we're trying to achieve. I am able to kind of program and kind of develop software that are bespoke for our intentions. And I like to summarize this into what I do is basically choreographing digital experience and then choreographing all those kind of pieces of the puzzles to create those experiences. And what that looks like for Unwired, what we do there is that we make immersive and playable experiences for remote audiences, in real life audiences, virtual stages, galleries, and sometimes more, very often more in conventional sites. And what we focus on is really thinking about how our sense of empathy and our connections between humans tend to be affected when mediated by technology. So there's a lot in our work, questions around control and harassment and remote connections and empathy, and how all those different aspects tend to have very, very blurred boundaries. I saw your slides, Braden, and I thought I should kind of try to show off my laurels as well. So try to. We're known for those projects, and then the most recent one we've been working on is called Discordance, that we'll go into in a minute. A lot of our work has actually been created and kind of enhanced through the pandemic with a lot of remote work, a lot of digital work that involves audience participation. And with strings, unwanted waters, and discordance, we started working in virtual reality. I'm going to go into that journey with you. But before I go into that, I just want to explain a little bit what the work we're doing with digital embodiment and how we bring dance into virtual spaces. So there are kind of three things we're quite involved in. The first one is just exploring movement with avatars in virtual spaces. So we've been doing a lot of experiments in the last 12 months with me in London and another performer in New York, both in motion capture, and understanding what we need in our virtual space to just be able to interact with each other. So what type of bodily form we need, or how we can expand our bodily expression with maybe things that are not at all representing a body. So we experimented with smoke, we experimented with lines, and so on. And the second thing we've been very active on is just the VR chat community. And there's a really big dancing community on VR chat of professional and hobbyists there that just really enjoying dancing in the virtual space. And then lastly, we've been doing a lot of work with Onboard XR, dancing in VR and full motion capture, which I will explain in more detail in a second. So with all this work, our key kind of challenges has been to really think about how do we get our audiences into VR. And I want to frame everything I'm going to tell you but with this big question, because we've been doing all of those things here is great. We can go really far with things like game engines, but our main challenge has really been to think about how do we bring them. We're not necessarily a traditional dance company that does like concert work in a proscenium theatre, but still our audience was very much people we wanted to like come in person to see the work. And then thinking about making work in VR was a massive challenge for us to think about where do we do this work and how do they get to see it. So we've taken kind of two really big approaches there. One is to do some work using a WebXR platform that allowed us to just kind of send the link and have anyone joining in the web browser. So they could join if they had a VR headset, but also that opened the door to people on a computer or on a phone, be able to enter that virtual space. And then secondly, we've been working really hard on creating hybrid experiences. And since things have reopened, trying to bring those experiences in person. And I know that Brendan's going to talk more about this because we've got very similar setups, so I'm not going to go into this too much. But that's been quite important for us to start kind of reconnecting with audiences we had also pre-pandemic. But we had a bit of a challenge there. So our practice is obviously movement practice is very rich in terms of how we're expressing ourselves with the body. And when we started working with WebXR and specifically in Mozilla Hubs, we were very limited with this three-prong tracking that Braden was talking about. So just the head and the hands. So how do we translate that full body movement into those three-point tracking? So we had a kind of journey in exploring that and understanding the possibilities of WebXR. We started by porting this piece of work called Strings into the virtual space by just working with videos. And then we started looking at how can we leverage that virtual space to create richer interactions. And that allowed us to start modifying the code base, understanding how we can build those interactions there. And so this piece of work is an interactive piece of work where the audience is able to manipulate my body wearing haptics, and by their position in the virtual space, they are sending me signals and a haptic feedback to decide which body part should move. So in this version, they could physically place their body into the virtual space to decide on which gradient and then kind of which body part to move. Based on that, that gave us a lot of freedom in terms of understanding how to mess around with the code base and go much, much further. And thanks to the research work I was doing with Goldsmiths University, I had access to motion capture suits. And I started looking at how can I bring this into WebXR in a live setup. So customize hubs, modular hubs to integrate live motion capture with a piece of work called Unwanted Waters. And that opened the door to a lot of things, including being co-present with the audience without a full body in that virtual space. Then we moved on to actually bringing a second performer in the space who was in another location. So with me in London and the second performer in New York. And then very recently with Discordance, we started bringing this piece of work that has a similar setup, but now bringing this into a theatre and also offering people in VR in person, in VR remotely, and on the live stream. So just to summarize a little bit this journey, just integrating video, starting creating custom interactions, building live mocap capabilities, bringing 2 performers, and that enabling different experiences and ways to experience the work from remote VR to in-person in theatre. So I want to show you 2 trailers, one from Unwanted Waters to start with. You should be able to hear the sound. No, because I didn't click on the right thing. Bear with me. I need to do this and this. So with this piece of work, we explored a lot in terms of understanding the potential for Unwired with what we can do in that virtual space, including what we can do with audiences in that virtual space. And a lot of the work we had done before was either complete in person or kind of hidden behind a flat screen. So suddenly we were co-present with the audience there, and we could start bringing some of those immersive theatre techniques back into the work. And I want to show you now the trailer for Discordance, where we start bringing kind of this level of hybridity with remote and in-person participants. Let me try to find the arrow. There we go. So, well, let me play this in the background. Here we go. So with this piece of work and kind of building from the learnings from Unwanted Waters, what we really spend time doing with Discordance is to think about the role of the audience in the virtual space and how their physical presence and their physical body and virtual body can interact with us in the space. We have different moments in the piece where we are inviting them to move with us and really taking into consideration that they only have head and hands tracking and we have a full body. So if I go back to the beginning, just to show you more examples, we invite them first in front of a virtual mirror, which is a really, really effective technique for people to understand and get a sense of embodiment in the virtual space. and getting them to do very, very simple movement. And we found out that by doing the same movement, really kind of seal that level of intimacy in the virtual space and doing things together. And then we have another moment where we built machines with very simple movement, and we got the audience to repeat those movements with the machines. And you can see them on stage kind of repeating those kind of basic movements they had. There are other moments in the piece as well where that presence and that movements will have a key effect on the story, where my body gets completely disconstructed, which is quite like a key narrative moment. And they have to approach and they have to bring their own body to reanimate me and then make me be whole again. And just a side kind of parenthesis on this, Brendan has been working on the dramaturgy on the piece, so it's a full kind of full circle presentation today. So I want to go a little bit more in the kind of practical aspects of what it means to dance there. Dancing in full mocap in VR, very often in a limited space, because I show you this beautiful theater, but most of the time this is happening just here in my studio, aka my living room. So I want to show you a little bit of the practicalities of working there. First of all, one thing, and it's interesting, I'm starting with this on purpose, but one thing that enables us to perform there is to build tools for performers, and to kind of actually building on what Braden was saying earlier about having this kind of different view for performers to be able to perform there. One thing we've done is to integrate the amazing queuing system and stage management system that Onboard XR offers, and what we did is to connect this with QLab. And because we're working a lot with music, we have a very clear timeline, and for us adding the kind of virtual cues to the music was really key and really enabling us to work in that space. And that allowed us to do two things. Is on the left hand side, I can do it almost on my own from home, from basically this is from this view in this exact room, where I can, while performing in VR, I can press a space bar and then trigger the next cue. But it also works in the theater context where someone else can be the stage manager and manage what's happening on stage. And that's quite key to have all kind of the trickery we have in the virtual space to be able to change scenes and change avatars and be able to tell that story kind of with those multiple layers. As kind of movement practitioners, we had to learn how to work with those different layers of spatial awareness. And we're pretty much working with a minimum of two kind of virtual spaces. One is the physical space that is limited, and then the virtual space actually extends way beyond what we can perceive in our physical space. So to give you an example, on the left-hand side, this is my play space, and that would translate to the virtual space as this kind of small square, but the virtual space is much, much, much wider than what I could do if I was just walking into the space. And moving from different performing spaces as well will completely change that awareness. So we tend to work a lot with the different kind of senses, with proprioception, body awareness, and spatial awareness to understand how to position our body in the space. And interestingly, we don't rely as much on our sight as dancers in the space. I've realized fairly recently that I spend most of my time dancing with my eyes closed because it is a little bit disturbing, like trying to spin in VR with a headset and the world that kind of try to catch up is really difficult, and it gets easier to close your eyes and then rely on all the other senses. So I tend to perform with my barefoot, so I can feel the space. I know exactly where there's a crack in my living room, so I know exactly where I'm in the space with that. And it's actually really, really important, but also understanding how to position the body to kind of compensate for the things that we will probably do in real life. So things like, as a dancer, to turn, we will spot and fix a point in space. We can't do this anymore. So we have to rely on all the other senses to be able to do those movements and then keep balance, for example. And then I have a trick I use as well, is I draw things on the Guardian. So if anyone has been in VR, usually you draw your play space. And what I would do is I would add extra kind of triangles or small signs to indicate where's my front, where's my side. So that really helps me, and I push the sensitivity to the maximum as well. So I'm constantly seeing the cage around me. So I know exactly if I have to actually use my physical body to run to the corner, I know that I will have the space to do so. And I can kind of map the virtual space and the physical space in my brain all the time. And then to expand the limit of the physical space, in my code base, I have mapped the position of my avatar with the position of the joystick, which seems pretty basic, but then having that kind of double possibility of moving the body versus moving virtually with the joystick really allow us to go much further. And I'm really good at walking on the spot now and pretending that I'm actually working in the physical space or virtual space. And then lastly, I kind of want to finish on this because I think this is actually probably the core of it, but it's really understanding how computers sees the body. And then that really goes back onto what Braden was saying is we're currently limited with how the body is being tracked. And usually when we think about dancing, if we were just asking maybe an artist to illustrate what dance looks like, they will probably draw something like this. But when we look at it through the lens of a computer, we usually end up with a skeleton with a few points being tracked. We can work with inverse kinematic to really have kind of the detail of the body, or we can work as we do with a motion capture system. We're using this one that has 17 points of tracking, just to show off a little bit. But this is still very much related to the position of the bones in the space, and it doesn't capture the subtlety of the body in movement. So we have to really work with it when it comes to choreographing in this sense. So first of all, in our process, we choreograph directly in VR and in mocap. We make a lot of use of virtual mirrors, but we've realized that choreographing in the real world and then trying to get in there and then adapt it doesn't work. There's a lot of the movement that doesn't read, and it's really important to understand how to move with your virtual body. We do this work with the avatars as well. And then again, this is really related to what Braden was saying with puppeteering and understanding where the eyes are. And it's very much the same. So we realize that, for example, if we're trying to reach forward to grab someone's virtual hand, our mocap hand might not be in the right place, and we had to really kind of adapt that. Or when we do a duet and we're trying to move together in the space, we need to understand how to move with this virtual body. We're borrowing a lot of techniques from puppetry, clown, mask work, and Butoh as well, and Butoh specifically for understanding how to position the weight of the body, and kind of related to what I was saying about kind of proprioception. And we've realized that we need to make everything big, and it's actually very different to the work we do when we are not in VR. We tend to do way more work that is more attached to kind of physical theater, and we work a lot with subtlety and subtle movements, and none of that reads in VR. So we need to make things bigger. So we really have this image of we're dancing for the back row. We are going a little bit more back to our kind of ballet and jazz techniques that are more aligned and having, long arms, long legs that tend to then translate way better in mocap. And then lastly, it's also understanding the limitations of having all this equipment on the body. What does that mean in terms of movement? That also means understanding the limitations for any new joiners. For example, so the performer who dances with me in Discordance is called Lena Wolf, and she's absolutely fantastic, but she hadn't done a lot of VR work. She's done a lot of mocap work, but not a lot of VR work. And when we're starting rehearsals, we had to stop every 15 minutes because she wanted to throw up. So understanding the limitations of the body to also go through that process and be able to make the work was really important. And we've got a really big equipment on the head. There's a lot of things in terms of backbands and protecting the neck that is very different to doing work without the equipment. And then the motion capture suits tends to be attached to certain parts of the body, which means that we can't necessarily use the knees. We have controllers in the hands, so we can't actually go to the floor. There's a lot of limitations around that. And lastly, there's something very interesting about perception of time. We've realized that we move slower in VR. And I don't know if there's any research, but just as a dancer, we realized that if we were to do the same choreography with that headset, and then sometimes we just break and go onto Zoom and just have a quick kind of catch up as to what is this movement, we realized that we move faster without a headset. And once we're in virtual space, it is much lower, which is quite interesting. So just to finish off, if this is how a computer sees body, one thing we're researching constantly is what gets lost, but also what new can be created. And we work a lot with avatars, other forms, and other type of storytelling with the body. And we both understand the limitations and also quite excited about what can be created. So that's it. I'm going to pass it on to Brandon.
Fantastic, Clem. Thank you so much for diving through all of that. I'm now going to reopen the exact same presentation because we are sharing one on my own device here. And I'm just such a proud mama bear, honestly, watching those presentations, because I think in looking at the slides of Braden and Clemence's work, I have either performed with, attended, or supported all of those productions, or almost all of those productions, which I think is also just tells everyone in this community, we like supporting each other's work, and we often work together a lot. So if something resonates with you today that you're seeing, please contact us. We're approachable. Invite us to your work, because we're constantly learning and iterating as well. This is a small community, and it's also a very friendly and collaborative one. And that's where a lot of my work has kind of steered us into. We've had a lovely kind of deep dive on the performing in VR and kind of the background of bringing thousands of years of traditional craft into these new spaces and technologies. I'm Brendan Bradley. I'm a actor and scrappy storyteller. I've worked in literally every medium and mode of narrative storytelling. I will not put up a slide with all of my nonsense because I do not want to bore everybody. But I've just been very privileged to work in a lot of different modalities. But then it's a conversation of kind of where do we invite this playable invitation into our entertainment and our content. And what we've discussed so far is the performer invitation. But when we invite the audience to come play as well, we're giving them access to some of these same tools. And that brings us into the biggest conundrum of all new technology, which is strangers on the internet. And the idea that making virtual spaces accessible inherently means making them vulnerable to abuse or at least misunderstanding. And so I think there's 4 key pillars that we try to look at in trying to unpack this work and approach this work, both for performers using the space as well as inviting audience to it. And the first is intention, just a clear purpose of the gathering in a shared space and an invitation to meet those expectations. And this really falls into the work of Priya Parker, The Art of Gathering, really just making a clear reason and intention and kind of direction for why we're gathering, what the purpose of this event is, and what kind of the basic foundation and culture of this experience is going to be. Then there's ritual, which is rooting the initial virtual experience in an established physical practice. And I think this is really remarkable, especially as Clem's discussing this different way in which the body is both captured and expressed. In many ways, finding the cracks on your floor that can root you back into space to make you feel embodied, even though you are physically or visually embodied as an avatar, having that duality of both a physical and virtual representation, I think is important to connect you to the ritual of the experience. And then there's tiers of participation, which is really thoughtfully designing the users to opt into their desired level and style of participation. And the most important point on this is that that includes passivity. In a lot of ways, we think that interactivity means, oh, how cool we can interact. But I don't think we actually have the data to support that the majority of users want a high level of gamified interaction. There's a lot in between, including the people who just want to, as Braden just did, lean back and observe. There is something for this theater nerd to just sitting in the dark orchestra seat and watching the show and not being called upon. Especially as an actor, sometimes I get very anxious when other performers are inviting me to suddenly improv or participate in their performance because I don't want to take over or screw it up with my own creative practice. And finally, good rules and moderation, which is just simply clear guidelines for what the expectations and rules are, and then immediate enforcement. And that's just the basic safety of most platforms on the internet. what's remarkable is that while these technologies feel so new and different, and we very quickly want to leap to kind of new modalities or kind of speculation, it's actually, as Braden and Clem were describing, really rooted in the thousands-year-old stagecraft of theater. We have ritual, we have the concept of why we gather, how we gather. We have a very clear onboarding process of coming to a physical space that we are aware of kind of the etiquette of that space, entering that space, going to our designated place or seat as we've opted into our participation with that space, and then observing a narrative experience, and then leaving, which is equally important, the offboarding of that experience. Technology has always inherently been a part of our storytelling experiences as humans. We talk about surrounding the campfire and telling stories. The fire was the technology. It was a brand new tool that offered heat and gathering and helped us cook food, but really bringing us together in a new way. And through that, the written word became technology for some period of time to be able to disseminate and tell stories and share our culture. And all these kind of theater has always been this kind of way to integrate shared space and technology, ritual, and culture that I think is no different now that we enter virtual reality and extended reality technologies. I think the
Brendan,
one key.
I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you. Is there any way for you to close this pop-up? Because it's covering up a bunch of text on your screen.
I certainly can try. Is it this?
I
little
think just
guy?
hit the X should do it. Yay!
Thank you so much. I'm sorry.
Awkward
my-
interface, blah, blah, blah.
Perfect. Speaking of onboarding, excellent. That actually is perfect because we look at kind of theater, proscenium work, as well as cinema, if that's an extension of theater, as kind of a frame or a lens, and things can get in the way of that frame, and I apologize. But as we move into virtual space and being embodied in that space, we actually kind of change into more of a hallway where we're still encountering all the elements of that production. However, we're able to move through and among them and kind of change our pacing as we encounter them. And so I think being able to think about virtual experiences, not just as a simple kind of codified lens, but also inviting the audience through a very clear, guided path where they can encounter the different components of your narrative and your production and your character. We have a lot of kind of clunky shared language that we get into in the tech space. We've used digital to mean literally everything, interactive to mean everything, virtual means everything, 360, immersive. Experiences has started to feel that way, metaverse has started to feel that way, but some words that I've really taken away from today, and some of this gets into the work of Kimberly Adams with Adventure Lab, Dr. Crum, and some of the work that we've talked about today is responsiveness and more encounters. These are performances and experiences that we are inviting the audience to encounter at their own kind of desired level of participation and their own agency and their own timing. And in many ways, you can stretch, as Clem said, you kind of slow down in the space, and time can be really up to each performance to kind of how we move through the narrative. So codifying all this within theater, I think theater is a really great place to start as we begin a journey into any new technology, especially virtual reality. And so that's where my journey began in the middle of COVID. I released a theater. I just built a free templated space that I gave away on Mozilla Hubs, which is a web-based virtual reality platform that anybody could quickly customize. And you can try it yourself by going to my website, brendanabradley.com/gift. It's a free gift. But it basically allows you to take a templated space, a theater that has its ritual, immediately customize it with your elements. And hundreds of people have used this for classes, workshops, panels, performances, even NFT galleries. And it starts to wander into what I think is the trifecta of any good virtual experience, which is the combination of accessibility, live responsiveness, and immersive technology. And this is kind of our trifecta that we've focused in on for the Onboard XR Showcase and Festival. We look at all these platforms. Braden started to flirt with a couple of these. He talked about VR chat, which is towards the top left there. There's so many, and they are growing by the day. There is no best tool or correct tool. Every tool offers something different and a different exchange based off of the needs of your production. We focused in on Mozilla Hubs for those key reasons, that it's web-based, there's no download, there's no software that you need. There's no specific hardware that you need. It works in pretty much any web connected device. And it's an open source code base that allows you to get under the hood and actually customize it to add on some of your own functionalities and features. And we'll get into that in a little bit. As an ecosystem, Mozilla offers the hubs, Mozilla Hubs kind of web-based virtual reality platform that allows you to create rooms or instances that you can host different virtual gatherings. It's a multi-user experience in your web browser. They have a companion Mozilla Spoke, which is their world building platform that allows anybody in their web browser to basically spin up a 3D world to varying degrees of skill and ability. They have a built-in library that's an architecture kit, a rock kit. They also have a Sketchfab integration, so you can bring in Sketchfab models. Obviously, with more 3D modeling and kind of robust support, you can really stand up far more impressive scenes. But this allows literally anybody to build a 3D scene, stage a 3D room, and host anybody on any web connected device. And then the Mozilla Cloud allows you to kind of deploy your own customization of both Spoke and hubs to be able to fully customize the platform to your particular needs. And where Onboard has taken this is creating our own integrated theatrical queuing system, which is kind of like the Q Lab for the metaverse. It's the idea of being able to break down moments or interactions that you want in your show, changing lights, changing scenery, changing avatars, moving different 3D objects through space, and being able to program them at a JavaScript level and basically injecting snippets of that code into the web browser in real time so that it populates across everybody's device. And so we started by literally copy and pasting code into the developer console of Google Chrome to try to make some of these functionalities happen. And it has evolved, if you see in the bottom right, into similar to what Braden was describing, of the performer can see their own customized UI that they'd be able to click on buttons to actually have certain mechanics happen in the world that the audience would not see the buttons, but they would see the actual interaction take place. You can also then bury those around the room into kind of 3D objects that you could click on instead, but we represent it right here as a UI. And then Clemence's work has taken that recently into QLab to actually deploy them as traditional cues in the theater, which is really remarkable. I don't know what happened to this slide, but I'm guessing this was a video. It was a video that is not playing. But this leads to how we've brought Onboard XR to life. And there's a trailer for it at onboardxr.org.
It is showing for us.
Oh, it is showing. Lovely. Well, then I'll hush and let it play.
Don't hear the sound, however.
Cool. Well, you can trust me that there was thrilling music behind it.
Absolutely thrilling. It is now finished.
So we have 10 minutes left. Just wanted to let you know in case you wanted to take some audience questions.
Yes. I'll wrap this up real fast.
Great.
Lovely. So we have used the Onboard XR kind of pipeline to present 25 plus live events and world premieres, including some of the work that Clemence has shown and Braden has shown. And we've monetized the work of over 50 artists. And I want to skip through a little more closely to kind of then the numbers of how this works is if 17% of the people in the US used VR in 2021 in the last year, we're talking about a very small audience that has even begun to adopt this work. We have a long way to go. But even this small capture of an audience, 19% chose to pay over $20 for our Pay What You Want ticket, with the average coming around $15. And 1 in 3 attendees report our work as the first VR or live VR experience. And we really credit this to empowering them to, again, enter the space at their own desired level of participation. And we offer 3 audience tiers: an on-stage ticket where they wear an orange life preserver that says pick me, a more passive orchestra ticket where they are wearing a gray life preserver, they're kind of in the dark, they're being ignored, and then a balcony ticket, which is either a ghost avatar that is invisible and doesn't have microphone access, or a secondary live stream out to YouTube, Twitch, or Zoom, so that they're just watching it without having to enter the VR experience. I'll wrap it up there on my end. We can, of course, take questions, but there's more information on this in the, what is it called, Works Cited area if you want to find out more about how to bring your production into Onboard XR or work with any of the 3 of us.
Great. Well, I think I will, hopefully I can get my camera back on. I think Rafa's maybe on the, to just do a little Q&A with you guys. That was fantastic. Kind of mind-blowing for me actually to watch. I did some real-time mocap actor work as a director with actors in the 90s with VRML, and saw a lot of connections between that and this, and that was with, you know, the high-end kind of high-tech equipment. I wanted to ask you guys, your last comment, Brendan made me wonder about the audience, because this is something I've been noticing a lot. Like traditional theater audiences, I have noticed, tend to be quite old and quite white. When we go into a Twitch kind of space, we tend to pull in a much younger demographic. So I'd love to hear what you guys have, what your sort of insights from, you know, the dance audience is different from the game audience is different from the VR audience is different. So I'd love to hear, like, who's coming and how do you cross over those audiences? Is there any way to do that?
I think that it's kind of coming from a bit of all directions in my experience. One of the most difficult parts of what we do, and what any of us involved here today and yesterday do, is discoverability, in my experience. So we're kind of pulling from our own crowds of people, our own circles, and from that, it's then, you know, spreading word of mouth, and people are getting word of, oh, what's this metaverse stuff, or whatever that word means now, which is nothing. But in my experience, it seems to be a solid mix, though going in, I had anticipated that it would skew much younger, just based on the fact that the majority of the people with access to VR tend to be younger crowds, people who are actively video gamers. I hate that terminology, but you know what I mean. But it actually skewed older in my experience at the beginning. It's only now starting to pull in people who tend to be younger. Like it was kind of like this before, with this being people, I don't know,
Yeah.
35 to 55 or whatever, and then down
I
here
think,
like 15.
yeah, I think there's a really interesting, that's an interesting insight, because first of all, I think the expense of the devices is a bit of a barrier of entry for this younger demo, because like my students, some of them have headsets, but most of them can't afford it. But the other thing is that my online games research, one of the findings that I did a trans world virtual world study in 2012. And it was really noticeable that the demo of non-game virtual worlds was older than the game world demo. So it tended to be, like you said, 35 plus tended to be. And also we found that the older people were, the more likely they were to be doing creative activities. So just something that maybe be this parallel. Perhaps it's the gaminess that makes things more appealing to younger people. I don't know. Have you guys? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Brandon.
Oh, I was just going to offer the insight that I think that both Clem and I have begun really returning to hybrid work of trying to really kind of pair both of these modalities together. And I think what I've at least seen from that is that you have the old guard theater audience that wants to, of course, come and sit in the theater and see the spectating, but there is then the interesting call to action of getting to watch their children or their youth on stage participating and engaged, and in some ways bridging the types of audiences that want to play versus the types of audiences that want to spectate.
Clem, what do you?
Sorry,
yeah,
but like on our side, it's actually interesting because I feel that with dance, those audiences do not intersect at all at the moment. And this is our main challenge because they some of them are interested in the work. On one hand, we have opened up the work to people who would have never gone to theater to see dance. So I take this as a massive win. So more, tech curious / gamers have been seeing the work, and that's been great to open it up to them. But on the other side, it's much harder to convince the hardcore traditional kind of dance kind of aficionados, because they don't understand what's happening there. And what we found is that language is very important to present the work. So the way we present it to maybe a theatre might be, this is a dance piece that is happening in virtual reality, versus maybe more interacting in interesting kind of immersive theatre / kind of playable theatre. Audiences will put a focus on interactivity and audience participation. So it's kind of playing a little bit with marketing, but at the moment, I must say, like, this is our main challenge. And convincing institutions as well is a really big challenge. One of the reasons why we decided to start working with QLab is just to reassure theatres. It's like, there's at least one thing you're familiar with.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting because people are very anxious about tech that they don't know, and they don't want to learn new tech. But the other thing that I found just in my own very limited, I did my first production this last summer, that theater is so regional. So that's also kind of interesting that we can branch out beyond the geography, the geographical limitation. We have like 1.5 minutes left. Braden, turn your mic on maybe, or
I'd like to take mime to the next level. No, I was muted. On that topic, that is very important to me and something that I didn't get the time to touch on. I live in the exotic location of South Dakota, which is not exactly known for its thriving arts community. All the work that we're doing would literally be impossible for me to see without flying hundreds of miles away. It just does not exist. But now, in order to not only participate in, but to produce and bring it to people like me who aren't in, a few select metropolitan areas around the world, with the only barrier of entry being, an internet connection, and depending on the show, like with Onboard XR, any device, or if it's one of Ferryman Collective's show, $300 Oculus Quest or what have you, versus a plane ticket and lodging and all of that's involved. Like, the accessibility is insane. And to have like shows where we'll have people who are like, oh, I'm in Japan right now, I'm in Brazil, I'm in Spain, I'm in the United States, all just in the same room, sharing the same space with no barriers, all political and cultural walls are just out the window. And that is just incredible and amazing, and arguably the most important part to me, but that's just because I'm in Nowheresville.
Well, this is not only is a great way to end your session, but a perfect segue to the next one.